This is week 2 and day 3 in the course. It's Friday, and we're talking about Introduction to Networking. Now, we met Monday and Friday last week, but this week we didn't meet Monday because of Labor Day. First thing, any questions on the network basics that we got started? And then we went into a number of things in Chapter 1 topics. The students took the quiz at the beginning of class, the practice quiz for the chapter. We mentioned Packet Tracer, but we haven't really done anything in that. I told the students to make sure you have practiced that. We accessed equipment, and we talked about finishing Chapter 1 on Monday and just getting started on Chapter 2 on Monday. And then there's some labs in Chapter 2 that we'll do next Friday. We reviewed briefly LAN and WAN, and we talked about what actually happens when a signal, how does a signal enter into the intermediate equipment from your end device to the intermediate equipment. And we talked about all the different ends devices, which with the Internet of Things are a lot. And then we went through and talked about intermediate network devices. And in doing that, we used our diagram. For example, this is a person. A person interacts with the computer, and then in this case goes through a wired and a fiber optic, leaves the academic IT, ends up over here at the main campus, and then communicates with the Iowa Communications Network. This all started, the whole idea was the students were supposed to draw what they thought the Internet was, and then we were going to follow it up with a drawing now of what they think the Internet is. The Internet's really this, it's got all of these connections, typically routers, that have different ways they can go to move the traffic through the Internet. A little history, we go way back. Mall Bell was made into a monopoly right around 1910, stayed that way until approximately 1984. It was American Telegraph and Telephone Company. Then it got split into, I think it was like 8 different ones, like Verizon, Sprint, etc., etc., etc. And those are all Tier 1 providers. They exchange information without charging each other. And then all the Tier 2 providers connect into them and eventually work out to our ISPs that we connect into the Internet with. So, one little review here. So before we go further, I mentioned this, Nyack and Charles City, and this whole thing is Nyack. We can connect to them through the Internet, and it creates for us a WAN. That makes sense? Everything locally here at Nyack would be considered a LAN. Same geographic area, run by one organization. Different, a WAN here different geographic locations and using some provider to get the connection between it. And last thing here, we talked about our connections here to the access point, or we could connect through some data plan to a tower, which eventually would get us into the Internet. Now, we talked a little more about what makes up the internet. We talked about tier 1 providers. I would guess these large organizations like Facebook and Google, in fact, some of these are their own providers, you know what I mean? But eventually they connect into the tier 1, probably directly. In some cases, they're big data centers. And we took a look at Facebook's data center down by Des Moines, and we didn't, but Google has one over by Council Bluffs. We didn't talk much about this, but we're going to on Monday, this connection. I've got a website out there, okay? What we did talk about devices, routers, multi-layered switches, and so forth in our network design. And we also talked about modems, okay? And then, I did a little work here explaining how plain old telephone service used to be waves, and we still have FM and AM radio. So amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, and a modem would modulate and demodulate to change digital to the waveform. Alright, so down in here we talked a little bit more about bits, and then talked about bandwidth, bits per second, quantity, bytes, okay? Typically 8 bits gives us a byte. Byte we think of more as quantity. We do think of quantity. Bits, we use that to represent speed, bits per second. Talk a little bit about the World Wide Web. It uses the internet. It's not internet. They're not the same thing. So, if we were to look at this whole picture, we have multi-layered switches, routers, modems, access points, layer 2 switches, and what makes the communications between these, we have protocols like Ethernet, the 4G or LTE, Wi-Fi, and then there's a wide range of protocols that can be used for WAN connections that we'll learn more about later on. Alright, I think that is it.